5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey there, Fatherhood for the rest of us. I am on with Tom Sylvester of Tom and Ariana and Lifestyle Builders. Tom's going to be on here today, and Tom had a goal to retire by 35, which I think that just happened this week, right? So that just happened.
It did.
Right, okay, so that just happened. We're going to find out whether or not he's retired today. He later found out that he actually didn't want to stop working, but instead desired to create financial independence. Tom is a business consultant, entrepreneur, speaker, and author. He works with entrepreneurs and business leaders to help them grow and scale their businesses through leadership, strategy, and systems. He spent several years doing this with Fortune 500 companies and their leaders before shifting his focus towards his passion, which is helping entrepreneurs and small businesses. After working with far too many entrepreneurs who achieve business success at the expense of their personal lives and relationships, Tom pulled Ariana in and started the Lifestyle Builders movement. They believe that your business should support your life rather than taking it over. As a result, Tom spends most of his days working with entrepreneurs on that mission, from coaching entrepreneurs, co-hosting the Lifestyle Builders podcast, and co-authoring the Lifestyle Builders book with Ariana. Tom, thanks for stopping on here today. And that's the most important question I think that anybody's going to have today. You're 35. I'm guessing, that's what we're here at. Are you retired? Did you retire?
So we'll say yes and no.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'll caveat that, because when I set the goal to retire, I actually had a mentor several years later come back and say, Tom, quit saying you're going to retire. He goes, because I know you, and you're a high achiever. You're never going to stop starting businesses. And more importantly, you're never going to stop helping people. He goes, but what you're really looking for is freedom. He goes, you want the ability to decide what your schedule looks like, decide what you do and what you don't do. And he was spot on. So yes, we both were able to leave our jobs. I left mine 2 years ago, but we still do work. The key is we're able to put our life first and design our life, and then choose the type of work we want, which now is really helping people that have been through similar things that we've been through, to do the same types of things, to be able to put their life first and live very intentionally.
Wow. No, that's huge. That's huge. And I love the idea of finding freedom versus, being retired, because I find the people that I know that retire, they don't know what to do with themselves, first of all, right? Like, I'm retired. And, but now you're free to do what you want when you want to do it. And you're setting that up. And that's awesome. How old are your children?
So our daughter is 7 and our son is 4.
7 and 4. So you're doing this as a father. And your story is actually pretty cool. And if I'm just going to kick it off in this area, so you don't have to tell this part. But you started going to conferences, and you went to a real estate investment one, right? And you and your cousin decide, you're like, all right, we're going to do this. We got to go. And you're feeling like this pain of the spark of the entrepreneur. Like, if I don't do this, then my soul is just going to melt away and I'm going to die into nothingness. Right. Yeah. And then, so you're like, all right, so we level up from the $500 fee into the $15,000, fee, that you split with your cousin, and you don't tell your upcoming wife. I mean, is that so for those of you that have already heard this, I'm sure you may have already heard Tom's story. You got a podcast everywhere, which is awesome. But I want to know this, right? Do you feel that if you hadn't pulled the trigger at that time, that you would be where you are today?
Absolutely not. And, I think if I hadn't pulled the trigger at that time, it would have came at some other time. Mm-hmm. Because here's what I know, not only from my own story, but from just being around other high achievers and entrepreneurs, is when we get something in our mind, we're going to keep pushing to do that. And right. So even before I pulled the trigger there, I tried to pull the trigger 5 other times, and Ariana just kept shutting it down. And it got to a point where I just did it. And I wouldn't recommend people, doing that. But the cool thing that happened was, through all the tough conversations afterwards, what it did was it forced us to really have the real conversations. And it forced us to, Ariana asked one question. I remember she was in the middle of tears. We're 9 months before we got married. She's trying to figure this out. And she goes, why would you do something like this? And that was the magic question, because what I had realized was, prior to that point, I kept telling her what I wanted to do. I wanted to retire by 35. I wanted to start a business. I wanted to invest in real estate. And I never told her why. And when I said, you know what, I want us to have the freedom to design our lives. I want our future kids and our family to be able to do what we want and not have financial struggles. And she's like, you know what, I want the same thing. And it was through that conversation that we said, now we're aligned on where we want to go. Now we can talk about how do we get there. And that's when we can say, where does real estate or business or our careers fit into that?
Right. And I think that you talk a lot about how the two of you, she's throwing up all these blocks, right? Like, and you're like, how about this? She's like, no. How about this? No. How about this? And she's ducking and dodging because, like you said, she's at that point, she was more of the conventional, more of the, the standards and all this other stuff. How did you talked in a recent interview, like, bringing somebody on board with you and your vision, and how did you two kind of, I know you just said, you got onto the same page, but initially you weren't even on the same page. You weren't even in the same book. You probably weren't even like in the same district libraries. You know what I mean? So how do you, because everybody, a lot of people have that, right?
Absolutely. So what we've seen it come down to is what I was always doing was I was always pushing. I was always advocating for my position, and I wasn't listening, and I wasn't asking. And I tell people nowadays, one of my biggest attributes, one of the biggest things that's caused me to succeed is being curious. And what I realized was that I wasn't being curious enough with Ariana. So when she was throwing up those blocks, rather than saying, oh, she clearly is not comfortable or something's going on, let me ask why, I just would try to push forward with something else. And I'll tell you, that doesn't work. It just makes things more complicated. So the biggest thing I always tell people is, like, when a block comes up or when your spouse doesn't seem like they're on board, ask why. Right. I was actually talking to a woman right before we jumped on here, and she's had some success with her business and she wants to keep growing it, but her husband doesn't want to invest in the business. So instead of just saying, well, screw your husband, go invest, I started asking questions, and basically he sees the business as just a money suck and a time suck. And I said, well, let's stop talking about the business. You guys got to get aligned on what you want the future to look like. And once you do that, then you can talk about if and how the business fits in. But until that happens, quit talking about business and talk about what's important, which is your life and what you want it to be. Right.
Well, I love how you say, though, like, you guys, you both want to get to the same place. You just got different vehicles to get there, right? And that makes a lot of sense. And I find that here too, right, at my own home. And I like what you're saying, though, is like, I probably face the same thing, right? Like, I'm like, hey, we're going to go do this. We're going to go do that. We got to do this. And, burn the bridges, burn the boats. But, it just reminds me of, I'm trying to think of which book. I read a marketing book recently. It might've been Story Builders. It might've been like, I read like 6 or 7 of them, like back to back. But one of them was like, invite them. Like, invite the other person along with you. Be like, it's not you're coming with me, let's go, because I'm a caveman, I just beat you on the back of the head. Yeah. But it's like, hey, would you like to go out to this land of, where we have all the things that we want because we work together to get there?
Yeah. And that's so important. And it's what I tell people now, because here's what happens. And it doesn't matter if it's entrepreneurship or if it's getting out of debt or whatever it is. What happens is that we're two different people. And one of us has an experience, and we've been on a journey, and we have an experience that changes us, right? We had the last bad day at work, or, maybe it's something, someone died or something happened, and it caused us to have an epiphany and want to change our path. Yeah. And the challenge is we just automatically assume that our partner is going to change their path as well, but they're on their own journey. Sure. And so what we have to do is to understand where they're at, and, like you said, invite them on their journey and guide them so that they can have their own epiphany, because it's not going to be the same as you. Yeah. So often we just get so excited, especially because oftentimes we have very similar personalities, and we just want to go, and we forget about bringing the people around with us.
Yeah, I mean, it's charged full speed ahead. Once you've kind of got that, once you're sparked, you're just like, we're doing this. Like, we're the Kool-Aid man. We're like, oh yeah, and then your wife is like, oh no. Oh no. Yep. Oh man. Gosh. So I mean, look, you have so much that you've done, and there's a couple things I want to just kind of poke your. This is just as much for me as anybody that's listening. So one of the things that I admire about you is you set this intention at a pretty young age. You're 35 now. You're several years younger than me. And what was it that kind of gave you that drive initially? And maybe talk a little bit about that. Like, who was Tom before, like, even before Ariana and you guys get together, right?
Yeah, so basically, like, what immediately kicked this off was as we graduated college, I looked ahead and I looked at the degree I had, which was computer science.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what do people with this degree do? And I look and they're sitting in cubicles all day and they're working long hours. And I was like, man, I probably should have looked ahead. I didn't sign up for this. And then I looked at what Ariana was doing and she had got a zoology degree and we're now like, close to $100,000 just in student loan debt.
Right.
And she wanted to live in New York and she couldn't find any jobs. So that was the immediate thing. I'm like, this path we're on isn't good. We got to change it.
Right.
But years before that, and I didn't realize some of this until, probably recently, and probably when I became a father, my parents got divorced when I was 12.
Right.
And there was some infidelity there, and I lived with one parent and another parent, and I ended up living on my own at 16. I was working 3 jobs, put myself through high school.
Wow.
And, during that time, there was a lot of points where I could have gone down a very negative path or a very positive path. And thankfully, I had really good mentors and support around me to guide me to make better decisions. But what's been really cool, like somebody asked me recently, they're like, if you could go back and change anything, what would you change? And I tell people, I'm like, even though I had a lot of challenges, I wouldn't change any of it because every one of those challenges that forced me to become a better person and become who I am today.
Sure.
So through all of that stuff going on, I really knew I really developed my core values. And it's a big thing we promote with people today is get clear on what you want, but also get clear on your core values and how you live and how you make decisions. And even before I became a father, I knew that family was going to be so important. And I knew that, like, for example, my senior year, like high school game, my senior game for soccer, I didn't have any of my parents there. So everyone's getting called out onto the field and their parents are there. And I get called out on the field. And I remember standing there and not having any family. And I just felt terrible.
Wow.
And it was like some of those events where I'm like, I'm not going to let that happen. So I don't care what I have to do. I'm going to make sure that family comes first. And I'm doing everything we can do to set up for that. So what I always tell people is like, look, whatever adversity you're going through, whatever challenges you're facing, realize that that's put in front of you to grow and become a better person so that you can show up for the people that are important in your life.
Right. Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle's Away.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good book.
Right. So, I mean, the obstacle's away, right? Like what challenge you're facing is exactly kind of what builds you, right? Has the opportunity to build you into whoever, you can avoid it all your life, or you can work with it and see how you can incorporate that and really improve your life if possible, right? Or just whatever. Take your lessons from it.
Absolutely.
And kind of move on. Before we even did this podcast, you and I were having a conversation, and you were just mentioning like how needed, these fatherhood podcasts were, these conversations, and the attention being given to fathers. Why is that? Like, what is it that it means to you to not only participate in these fatherhood groups, and even entertain yourself and to come on and speak to fatherhood podcasters? What is it that you feel is help? How's that helping?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. I've seen a lot of these mom groups, and specifically like they call them mompreneurs. Oftentimes stay-at-home moms or moms that have had kids and then end up starting a business while their significant other's working. And what I was always striving for was I was like, why are there no dad groups?
Right.
And, the thing that I've always seen is that there's a certain expectation of what masculinity is and what it means to be a male. And actually, at a recent session with our marriage therapist, we went through some stuff, and she's like, so where was your positive male influence growing up? And I had to really think about that because between going through the divorce and some of these other things, I really didn't have a lot of those strong characters in my life. And so for me, one, I want to be that strong character for, not only our kids, but for anyone that we have who needs it. And then two, once I got in and realized there were some of these dad groups, I actually just started talking to men and realizing that there's a lot of stuff that we need to talk about, but we can't talk about. And like a great example of what really just kind of tore my heart out, there was a stay-at-home dad. His wife was like a doctor. And so they were moving around because she was trying to get her practice going and getting her residency and all of that. And so he moved to a new city. He didn't know anybody. And he was a stay-at-home dad with 2 kids. Right. And he was trying to just find people to meet. So he tried to join like a local moms group. And the founder was like, well, let me go talk to people. And she came back and she's like, I want to let you in, but the group doesn't want you here because they're not sure if you're a pedophile.
Wow.
And I was like, wait, just be like, this guy's doing everything right.
Right.
Staying at home, he's taking care of the kids, taking care of the house. And just because he's a male, this group of moms thinks he's a pedophile. Like, we got to change that.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, right? So, I mean, you're participating in this kind of evolution of fathers and men, right? Like, I mean, just this whole idea that we participate a lot more in our children's life. I mean, look at you. You've made a lot of solid decisions. One thing that we didn't talk about was like the stint where you were traveling for quite a while and you didn't have that time with your children, right?
Yeah.
And then I love how you're touching on the men's groups and the need for that. And, do you find safety, right? Like, and kind of solace in these, like I find most of them in Facebook groups, right? Like the men's groups. We want to talk a little bit about like, kind of like how important, and I'm guessing a little bit of life-changing for you. I know it's been life-changing for me to find this, right? To realize that there's other men that, lo and behold, they have the same going on that I've got going on. And it's like this shared human condition. You want to talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think people just expect that we're going to figure things out. Like, we're going to figure out how to be a good husband. We're going to figure out how to be a good father. And what I've found is that anything that I've done well has taken work. And so you don't just naturally figure out how to become a good father. Sure, you're going to pick some stuff up and you're just going to make it work. You're going to figure it out. But I found that intentionality has been so critical. So being able to be around, other men and to talk about some of these things in the same way that oftentimes women have to be around other women and talk about shared experiences, I found it's been so powerful because in society, oftentimes it's like, well, men can't be vulnerable. And I know I went through, like you were talking about when I was traveling, I was working with these high level leaders and these leaders that were like twice my age. And I had to go through a lot of ego and a lot of growth to really say, like, who am I to be able to help these people, or who am I to be able to do this? And I think what I've found in just seeing, men come together and be able to talk about what it means to be a good husband, what it means to be a good father, what it means to put family first and really live intentionally. It's helped me, one, get clearer and more confident with who I am, but 2, realize the huge need for that. And it's helped me clarify that one of the things I want to do, one of the legacies I want to live, is to be able to help more people realize that, like, this is okay. And, you can be a strong male while also being supporting. You can be a strong father or husband while also going to a marriage counselor. All these things that are often seen as weak are actually the complete opposite. You've got to be vulnerable to really be strong and really be a good leader, not only in business, but also in your family. Sure.
I think that you can maybe liken vulnerability to building a resilience to something, right? Like, I mean, you can't build a resilience to anything until you start, going through it, right? So you're opening yourself up at counseling, and in front of your wife too. Like, I mean, and sometimes that's really hard because you feel like your wife is looking at you to be the solid, strong, provide, never changing, like always there, stable dude. And you're inside your head, you're like, shit, I don't know what's next, what's going on. And like, you're always going through things, man. And to open yourself up in front of your wife and have her still accept you for who you are. I mean, to me, that strengthens the relationship so much.
100%. And actually, one of the things we realized after going through counseling was I had a lot of emotion, but the way that I showed it and dealt with it was different. And so there were a lot of times where something would come up and I would react and Ariana wouldn't think I cared or was emotional about it. And I realized that I have to actually show the emotion, or I have to let her know how I deal with it and how it's different. And I was like, no, that affected me a lot. Here's how I dealt with it.
Oh my gosh, yes. Let's talk about that, man, because I think that's a brilliant point. And this is something that I didn't really even address or come face to face with until the past couple of years, and doing all this personal, development and work on myself. I had somebody ask me, he goes, Brandon, I hear you talking, but I don't hear you saying anything like with emotional words. I was like, he's 100% right. Like I had to come back and do like emotional work on myself, and like, outside of like, and just like you, outside of like carrying like a chalkboard or something and being like, like happy face, sad face or something. My wife doesn't recognize either, like that I'm feeling the things. I'm just not displaying it the same way that she would.
Yeah. What I've found is just being more aware and more present. Something I started doing a couple of years ago that before I did it, I always thought, oh, that's for like everyone else, was meditating. And I'll tell you, like, in the first time, if you've never meditated before, like you sit down and you're like, am I doing this right? Or like you do it for like 2 minutes and you're like, oh my gosh, that was the longest 2 minutes of my life. But what it really helped me to do is between our businesses, between having kids and everything else, our minds are always running so fast. And what I found was that I wasn't able to even know what was going on because, like most people, I was just running through life and the motions and not really living. And as you said, I actually was a traveling business consultant. So I would fly out on Monday mornings before my family got up, and I would hopefully get back on Thursday nights if flights were good. If not, I'd get back on Friday. So I literally called the hotel I was staying in my home at one point on accident because I was in another city 5 days a week and I was with my family 2 days a week.
Wow.
And so what I had realized as I was kind of going through all of that stuff is basically we've only got a limited amount of time, with our kids. We've only got a limited amount of time, with our family, and we've really got to be intentional and take those moments. And I didn't realize it until I had dropped my son off at his daycare program one morning, and we got out of the car and I see everyone else like rushing to get their kids into the program so they can get to work. And my son was starting to read the license plates. And normally my reaction would have been, well, I'm just going to rush him along. And I just stopped and I looked around and I was like, everyone else is just so go, go, go. And I normally would have been, and I would have missed this amazing opportunity to see my son seeing letters and numbers and reading them and just enjoying it. And it was like that. I was like, how many other moments am I missing because I have a smartphone in my hand or because I'm worried about the next business thing? And it was at that point that I really started to be a lot more present with what was going on and just saw all the joys and all the things we have to be grateful for every day that years before I had missed because I was just go, go, go.
Right. No, that's a huge pivot point when you catch that in your own life. Happened to me when I first started this podcast. Right. I first started this podcast and I spent a lot of time sitting in here. I'm like, I got to do this thing. I got to get this next person ready. I'm doing it. I'm doing all the things. And my son, Finn, walked into the room. He's like, hey, Dad, can we do, he trailed off and he goes, oh, never mind. You're working. I was like, screw this. I don't even know what it is.
No, you're going to
Right. I was like, no, this is it. But, it's in that moment. And it sounds like it was just in that moment, too, you realized just how important fatherhood is, not just to them, but to you, just how important life is. And just, you take that moment and you can't translate that to somebody who's not a dad. It's unfortunate, right? Like you can't translate that to the dude who's like, working 70 hours a day. Right. And doesn't, he's just like, oh, you got no ambition. You got nothing. You're like, as a matter of fact, I got everything. I got to go home and be with that. Right.
Well, and that's the most important thing. And like, we've got 3 different businesses, and our one we spend the most time on now is coaching entrepreneurs. And the business in our book and our podcast is all called Lifestyle Builders. Right. And the reason it didn't used to be called that, but the reason we shifted it that way is because what we realized was that so many entrepreneurs they'd get an idea and they'd run with it. And it's the same thing if you're like very high career focused or whatever else, and you don't intentionally build your life or your business or whatever else to support your life. And what we found from just seeing so many entrepreneurs, a little bit going through ourselves, was that so many people would build a successful business or have a really good career and their life would fall apart along the way. I had an early coaching client who I helped him go from like a bunch of debt to like over $1 million business. And he like moved his family to another country and all these cool things. And I was like, yes, this is it. And then he came back a couple months later and he was like, Dad, Tom, I need your help. And I'm like, listen, man, whatever it is, we'll get through it. We got through every other issue.
Right.
He's like, she left me.
Wow.
And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, my wife, she's asking for a divorce and she took the kids back to the US. And talk about a punch in the gut. And I had so many conversations with Ariana, and I'm like, listen, I don't want to just help people build businesses, especially if it's going to take away from their life. And so through a lot of conversations, we said, you know what? Lifestyle builders. We're going to help people get clear on what they want out of their life, and then set up their business, their career, whatever else to support and enable that instead of take it away.
I love that. I love that. I love that. And the words you use, and this is just coming from another interview that I heard you do, was, instead of work-life balance, do work-life integration. And, just before you even, jump into that, did you come up with that? Have you checked out this book before? Because this is a good one, and it's a good course that talks about work-life integration.
What book is that?
This is Total Leadership by Stuart Friedman.
No, but actually I got to add that to my list apparently.
So, what I love about it is I don't have my camera. I can't see my camera here, but I'll pull it up real quick. So these 4 dots that he's got here basically represent the different areas of your life. And he's got this Venn diagram that you do for sounds like it might be a good thing for you and your guys is you say, all right, well, here's my spirituality, here's my family, here's my work, and here's my community. How much of that overlaps? And the more you can get all of it to overlap, you've got integration. You don't want separation of anything from your life. You want a whole life. I don't want a life over here and a life over here and a life down here. I want them all to kind of overlap. So, talk to me a little bit about what your vision of integration looks like, though, when you're working with a client.
Absolutely. So I love that, and I'm going to check that out. What it comes down to is basically figuring out what you want your life to look like and then making intentional decisions to make that a reality. And when we ask most people, hey, what do you want your life to look like? It's like deer in the headlights. They don't know because we're all so conditioned to just go through things and not really think about it. And so one of the things that we first had to develop for ourselves, and then later on we realized other people could benefit from it too, was we have this 2-page life planner that helps people. We talk about it like GPS. It helps you set your destination. It helps you figure out where you're at today, your starting point, and then it helps you build a roadmap to incrementally get to your goals. And what we found is that most people want 4 things. And there's other stuff that can kind of fall within these categories. First off, they want things, right? They want a certain house or certain car. They want material things.
Sure.
And the second thing is they want experiences. They want to be able to travel with their family. They want to be able to get out of debt. They want to be able to do certain things. And for most people, initially, we're just in this survival mode. We want to take care of our families, and usually we're focused on the things and the experiences. And then this weird thing happens when you get those things taken care of and you realize you have the money you need and all of that. You almost get depressed because your whole reason for doing things was to take care of your family.
Right.
And one day you work so hard and you realize you have it.
Right.
Well, now what? What's my purpose?
For sure.
And what we found most people, they're the next 2 things when we go from survive to thrive.
Right.
Relationships. So now deepening relationships with key people in your life and key people you want to have in your life.
Right.
And then the final thing is impact. Being able to help other people beyond you and your family. And what we found for most people is that we call that living your legacy. So a lot of people think about the legacy they want to leave. We think about it proactively. What is the legacy you want to live right now?
Yeah. I don't want to leave it behind. I want to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And you talked about if you're not a father, sometimes you can't understand this. One of the best things anybody can do, go spend time with an elderly person that is near the end of their life and they're reflecting, because the things they hear and the things that you hear them focus on and what their regrets were, it's never, I wish I would have worked more. Or it's never, I wish I would have done. It's, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have spent more time with my family. And a lot of people look at me and they're like, Tom, you're so mature. And I'm like, you know what? One of the greatest gifts I've ever had was being able to be curious and be around people that have been before me and ask them questions and take their answers to heart. And one of the most important things is figure out what's important to you and then live intentionally every day to have more of that.
I love that. And I love that, that I did that with my father-in-law, right? I think you were talking earlier about not having a strong, male character in your life. And I didn't really have my father. I met him once when I was older, and he passed a few months later. so I didn't really have him in my life, right? And he wasn't a good role model anyways. But, I had some time. I appreciate and respect my father-in-law, and over several glasses of Chardonnay, I was like, hey, John, I was like, if you could, like the story earlier, if you could change something in your life, if you do anything differently, what would it have been? You go spend more time with my family. He was he was very successful in his business and career, but he wasn't, I wouldn't say wasn't successful, but that's the only thing he said. Right. And you know what? I've taken that. Right. And that's what I've done. And I had there was another interview that I did with a gentleman who was a little bit older, who was probably like in his mid to late 50s. And same thing. He goes, just focus on family. Focus on family, and everything else comes out after that. Because I found, and I'm sure that you see this, I mean, your kids and your family is an immediate reflection of like who you are, right?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people ever learn this lesson. And for a lot of people, it's much later in life than they would like it to be. And so when I was traveling for that job, Ariana was basically like a single mom. Right. And so we had like one of the things we've always done is we have this weekly meeting and we reflect on what went well, what wins did we have, right, and what challenges did we face. And we use that to then help drive what we do next. And I remember having one of our meetings where we stepped back and we said, is this the life that we want to live? Me traveling 5 days a week, you being here. And the answer was no. And then because of that, and because we knew what our core values were, it was such an easy decision to leave a well-paying 6-figure consulting job to be home with family. And for anybody on the outside, and if I could tell you how much flack I got from people, especially people that maybe weren't making that much money and they were only focused on the money, I got so much flack. And for me, it was a non-event because I'm like, well, one, we've got 2 businesses and we're making a decent income with that. But anyways, it doesn't matter how much money it is. What matters is being able to spend time and be there with my kids. And, that's a big thing that we're trying to share with people now. It's like really figure out what's happy and figure out financially what that requires for you. Most of us actually require a lot less money than we realize, but we just get so caught up in not really knowing what's going to make us happy, and we fill it with other things. When you take time to really figure out what makes you happy, like people look at a lot of the stuff we have now and they're like, well, why don't you have like a nicer house or a nicer car or whatever else? And I'm like, I could really care less about that. Like I drove around in like, a car that had like 200,000 miles. And I drove it for like 10 years because that wasn't what's important to me. And like I have a nicer car now, but if that got taken away or whatever else, it wouldn't matter because my family's here and my family's first.
Right. And I love that. If the things that are like that, like the cars, and they own you, right? Like eventually they own you, and they're the ones that are, kind of, that's forcing your hand in your life.
Just a quick thing on that before we go. So it is a lot of work to get, like, some people hear me say that and they're like, well, of course you can say that. You have 3 businesses or you had a well-paying career. We put in a ton of work to make our lives this way. So I just want to let people know, like, whatever's important to you, you can make it happen. You just have to, 1, get clear on what that is, and 2, commit to be intentional and do what you need to do every day to make it happen. So it's not to say that money's not important. And if you're struggling to pay your bills now, yes, you got to do those things. Realize that more money is never going to make you happy. You're going to keep chasing that money until you figure out what's important to you.
No, fair enough. The, you talk about it earlier, right? Like you get to these goals, you get to a certain place, you work really hard to get there, and then you get there, and then like maybe you're disappointed and maybe you're upset and you're like, well, what do I do next? But, talk a little bit about, and this line, it took me a while until after I did my first coach, right? I had went through my first coach only a few years ago. And when I started off, you hear all these one-liners like, it's the journey, not the destination. And you're like, shut up. And then you've got like, it's who you become. And you're like, shut up. But then you're like, it's about the journey, not the destination. It's about who you become, right? Like, I mean, let's talk a little bit about that, because it's not like, I mean, the goals are a part of it, right? The goals are a part of it. The achievements are a part of it and all these things, but it's the journey, not the destination, right? Like, what does that mean to you when I say that, right?
Yeah, when I hear those things, and that's why I just brought up that last point, because there's certain things you have to get to a certain level before you appreciate things. And sometimes those things that maybe trigger you, they trigger you for a reason. And usually it's because it's something or it's something that you want to be able to do, but you're not at the level yet to where you can accept that. And so that's why I say, like, one of the best things we can all do is listen to the people that have come before us, because they've been there, they have a lot of experience, and we can learn a lot from them. So to me, 100%, I agree, it's about the journey. And part of what I think helps all of us be successful is appreciating every day. And that is, when things go well, appreciate and pat yourself on the back for everything you did to make that happen. Right. And when things don't go well, in the same vein, realize that it was 100% on you. The decisions you made, what you did or didn't do, that all, like, you're right here, right now, because of every little thing that led up to this point.
Your decisions, every decision you made.
Absolutely. And some people look at that and they're like, they see the negative, but what you really want to look at is say, as a result of that, that means I have complete control over all the decisions I make going forward. Right. So when you look at people that are successful, they have what's called a victor mentality. And they're looking at everything that happens to basically say, how can I learn from it? If I want to get somewhere, how did that person get there and what can I do? They're asking questions. And if you look at somebody that's not successful, they typically have a victim mentality to where something happens and they're like, poor me, this thing happened to me. And they basically gave up all their control. So when I hear something like, it's really about the journey, it's really about your perspective and realizing that every step along the way, you have the ability to decide how you react and what you do from there. And that decision will lead to whatever outcome you get.
I love that. I love that. And the other thing you said, this also came from another interview. You've got your journey, you've got the goals, but it's not like you're not going to turn into this person who you become, and you're not going to get it all, because you said this is hard work, but you said do one small thing that like gets you to that goal, right? Like you talked about doing your Friday night field trips, but before you only had like a couple hours a night, and being intentional with that time. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, what it comes down to is a lot of times people set goals and they just see the big goal and they don't break them down. So I'll give you a couple examples. One of the things we want to do was get a bigger house. And so getting a bigger house requires more money and different stuff going on. So we could either say, well, it's either a bigger house or nothing, or we could dive deeper and we say, why do we want a bigger house? Well, in our case, it was, well, we wanted to get the toys out of the living room and get a dedicated playroom for the kids. So then we started brainstorming. You said, well, without getting a bigger house, what could we do in the meantime to do that? So we actually had our kids share a room, which they love, and then we created a toy room out of the other room. So that's a great example of being able to take a big goal that you want to get to and then break it down into incremental steps that you can do now. And a lot of people just focused on the end result. They don't focus on, well, what are the incremental steps that I can do to get there?
Love it. I love it. And because we live in not only in instant download, higher speed downloads, faster cars. How can I get somewhere faster and do something faster? And how can I 10x today's results tomorrow? Right? We live in that moment where we just want it all right now. But there's so much in between that if we just take like one small step towards it today, that shows us that we can do it. But in the other side of this is like we also in that instantaneous thing, we also live in this all or nothing society, right? Well, if I can't have it all by tomorrow 10x, then I don't want any of it, right? So I think it's really important that people take away from what you said there is to do these small things that can get you closer towards a vision of what you want versus not doing anything at all, right? Do something, anything small, whatever Absolutely. You can do within your means today.
Yeah, well, and we often talk about this whole journey as like a GPS. You got a starting point, you got a destination, and then what really sets a GPS apart from like a map is that you're constantly checking in, right? Mm-hmm. You drive a little bit or you walk a little bit, and then it checks in and it says, here was the path I was going to be on. Here's where I'm at. Is it the same path? Yes, let me keep going forward. If it's not, now we say, okay, well, there's two things we can do. We can either change the path because we learned something new and now we thought this was important, but we realize it's not. or we say we're off the path to get us to our goals. Now we got to redirect, and get back on. But all of that comes from that one step and doing it every day. It doesn't come from a giant leap. And that's where a lot of people, like, they think success is like a one-time event. And one of the favorite quotes that I had, and I got it back when I was playing basketball, a coach said, the championships are not won on the night of the big games, but by years before, by athletes that dedicate themselves to championship principles daily. When I heard that, like, that stuck with me. And what I realized was, people see some successful event and they think that that's a success. That success was every single day doing the right habits and doing the right things to lead there. And that's far too often what people don't understand. They just see the big outcomes. If you hear a news story or if you see a movie or anything else, it's highlighting that event. And oftentimes what people don't see is the unsexy part along the way that allowed that to happen. Right.
The dirt, the grind, the blood, the tears, all the hours, all the time. But, how are you teaching this to your children? What's something, how are they getting this from you?
I love that question. Every day, we model what we want them to see. And so, even like one of the best things we did was as part of our life planner, we defined our family core values. We defined what behaviors we wanted to have as a family. And we actually came up with a family mission statement. And so by doing that together, what that basically did was created filters for us. And now, like, one of the things you said, there's so much going on. We have 10X everything, all this stuff. Oftentimes what happens is that we get decision fatigue, and we're trying to make so many decisions that sometimes we get to the end of the day and we're just so tired that we don't make intentional decisions with our kids and with our family. So part of what we did was we made it easy for us. We gave ourselves core values and a very clear way to make decisions. And so what that allows us to do is every day we're able to live the way we want and to be able to show that to our kids. And so an important part of that is not telling our kids what to think, but helping them to learn how to think. And so we don't want them to believe the same things spiritually that we do, or religious or politically that we do. What we want to do is we want to ask questions and invite them to think and let them come up with their own beliefs on things. And so that's been, I think, our most important thing, is not giving them the answers, but truly being leaders and helping to guide them to come up with their own answers.
Right. No, I love that. A lot of times, my older son, he's the one who's always got the questions and can I get a hand with this? Can you help me with that? I got to ask him, like, what have you tried already? Have you tried anything already? Because I want you to be able to come to me for help, but I also want you to be able to say, hey, I tried these few things that, maybe we've looked at before. A lot of times it's like, hey, how can I get this mod to work on Minecraft? And I get that, right? But what have you done? Like, how far have you gotten there? Like, walk me through what you've tried. Don't just come running to me for help. Again, I'll help you, but put some effort into it.
Well, that's one of the things, I think a lesson that we all have been, I would say, like, taught incorrectly is how to view failure. At least the way I was growing up, and I think in schools and everything else, it's to avoid failure. And what ends up happening, and I think we've seen this with, maybe the generation after me, is, we avoid failure so much that, one, kids are never exposed to failure and they don't know how to deal with it. And then two, what ends up happening? Failure happens inconsistently, but it happens on a big scale. And when it happens, people don't know how to react to it. So especially being entrepreneurs, we view failure as an everyday thing, and we want to fail more often, but we want to fail on a smaller scale. So it's not as big of a risk to us, and we can learn and grow from that. So that's been another big thing too that I think has come from our entrepreneurship side into parenting, has been actually encouraging our kids to fail and letting that happen. Because just like me, all those challenges and all the failures I had to go through and overcome let me be the person that I am today. It's the same thing with our kids, like letting them fall and scrape a knee, letting them do some of these things. And I think far too often we try to protect our kids too much, and we actually end up hurting them more than helping, because we don't help them develop these skills and these emotional traits to be able to deal with life and what comes at us.
No, I like that too. But I think that comes from the entrepreneur space. And I think that comes, we're seeing so much more of it. I feel like we're seeing so much more of it now where they're breaking out of, you talked about it again on another podcast, about like breaking out of like the tweed walls, right? Like, and being like, this isn't my life. This doesn't have to be my life. But since I know this isn't my life, what do I want my life to look like now, right? And so asking yourself all these questions, and now you're like, well, I want my children to do that for themselves too, right? And so I think that the entrepreneur mindset facilitates that mindset for your children. I love seeing that show up there. So thanks for answering, like, how do we show our children that, right? Let's do some rapid fire ones, brother, and we'll let you get out of here. So a couple of them, it's like, what does fatherhood mean to you, Tom?
That's a good question. I think fatherhood means that you're able to help these tiny humans grow and, really leave or live your legacy. It's the way that you can carry on everything that you've learned to be able to pass that on and keep it going.
Nice. What do you feel like your legacy is going to be?
I hope my legacy is, people just saying, Tom was a great guy. There's going to be a lot of really good stuff we do, but at the end of the day, if someone can look at me and be like, yeah, he was a really good person, that's all I need.
That's awesome. It's not going to say something like he was really good with spreadsheets.
that might be the subtitle.
He was really good with spreadsheets. What was your relationship like with your father?
It was up and down, basically when my parents got divorced, there was rumors that he had cheated on my mom. And I had a conversation with him and he said, nope, I didn't do it. And so when they got divorced, I stayed with him. And then several months later, I found out that he did. And that really caused a lot of challenges. And, we have a good relationship today, but it took me really going through a lot to work through that, because when you have this person that you put on this pedestal and suddenly, this thing of your family breaking apart that you never thought would happens. And, you go through something like that, it really makes you, one, question a lot of things, but then two, I think the positive coming out of that is it really helped me to shape what kind of father I wanted to be.
Love that. What is something that your father did for you while you're growing up, or even today, that you do as a father?
That's a great question. I think he takes me and involved me in what he was doing. So, for example, my father was a construction worker. And so he would, take me to the jobs and just kind of show me what he was doing. And he exposed me to, how we made money and what things look like. And I do that all the time with our kids. We take them on, we call daddy-daughter dates or mommy-son dates. And we expose them to what we do in the business as well as just kind of what the rest of our lives look like.
I love that. Let me ask you this question. I don't think I've ever asked this, so I'm not sure how it's going to come out. But actually came out yesterday. I was doing a chapter for a book that I'm working on. But in teaching your children how to make money versus creating value for others.
Yeah, what we always look at is, so many people think entrepreneurship is about having a great idea and then selling that. What we look at is looking for a problem and solving that. So what we always teach our kids is, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And then what can we do to solve that? So we always talk about money as the byproduct of providing value to somebody else. So by looking for problems and then challenging them to think about how they can solve it, they've come to realize that when they do that, they get money. So we've been trying to kind of train them that thought process rather than like make money first.
Yeah, I love that. Because we don't want to teach them to exchange hours for money. We want to, from my perspective anyways, as a parent, I want to teach them to give value for, get money for providing value or providing results for somebody else.
Yeah, and a great story on that. So we live in New York, so we get a lot of snow in the winter, and we forgot to renew our plow contract this last winter. So we got a heavy snow, and I got up early in the morning. I went out, shoveled the driveway, and I came back in. And when I came in, my son and my daughter were there, and they both gave me money out of their piggy banks. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? What's this for? And they're like, well, mommy's got to get out and drive us, and you went out and shoveled that before she got there, so you deserve money. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm parent of the year. Like, listen to this lesson that our kids picked up, and they're taking their own money and paying it to me because they saw me do something nice for somebody else.
That's great. I love that. I love that too. Um, what about meditation in your children? Do you try to get them to meditate? Do you try and teach them that skill?
Absolutely. My wife hasn't necessarily got into meditating yet, but one of the things that I started doing was at night before we go to bed, just doing a 2-minute meditation. And so what's cool is the app that I use actually has a kids version.
Which
And
one do you
so
use?
Headspace.
I love it.
Yep. And so they actually adjust the lesson and make it relevant to kids. So we have a routine at night before we go to bed, and the kids and I'll lay on what we call the comfy bed, which is our giant king size bed. And we'll just spend a couple of minutes kind of meditating and reflecting on the day. And I'll tell you, it's made such a big shift in, I think, their awareness and their ability to kind of slow down and appreciate things.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. My oldest listens to Wayne Dyer going to sleep. Right, because that's
Wow.
look, man, I like they would listen to like other things, and finally I was like, screw it, I'm picking the things, because if I'm gonna lay down with you guys before you go to sleep, and if I have to stay here, I want to listen to something too. So I'd listen to like Wayne Dyer, Alan Watts, all these guys. But we started with Headspace, and it's funny because at our house we have the two kids, and one likes Headspace, the other one likes Calm. It's like we've got the real battle of the meditation apps going on at home. So
That's funny.
it's pretty funny. I heard you talking about Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. What are some other book resources that you have found have had the greatest impact on you as a father?
Yeah, 7 Habits was definitely one. There's 2 books out there, forgetting the names now, like 52 Things That Every Daughter Needs from Their Father and 52 Things Every Son Needs from Their Father.
Okay.
Those were both big. I actually picked them up in the airport when I felt terrible for leaving the kids. And then that started me to basically do like daddy-daughter dates to make sure I was doing those things.
Sure.
There's one, The 7 Principles of a Highly Successful Marriage. Game changer in terms of your relationship with your spouse.
I love that.
And another one is Principles by Ray Dalio. And basically the book talks about all the principles he's learned, both in running his business as well as his life. And what was really cool for me was when I read it recently, the last couple of years. So much of it aligned with what I had seen as well. So for me, it was a lot of validation that the stuff that we're doing and the stuff that we've learned, somebody that's much further ahead and experienced a lot more of life really is aligned with that. So that was really cool.
Well, the question for you, because I think that you've probably had more coaching prior to with your business and your business ventures than before you had kids. Can you correct me on that? Yes or no? Like, did you have coaching, business coaching and mentoring before having kids?
Yes, I did. Before you ask the question, the one thing I'll say is that I actually got to a point where I had coaching and I had success, and then I stopped. And I stopped because I basically let my ego get in the way, and I felt like I couldn't get coaching or ask questions because people expected me to have all the answers, and they would think that I was a fraud or an imposter if I did.
Right.
One of the big lessons that I learned was, we always need coaching and support, and we can't let our ego get in the way of learning and becoming better.
Yeah, man. Look, what if we take away Tom Brady's coach? Do you think he's still going to do as well? Right.
Yeah.
Look, Tiger Woods still has a coach. These guys are all high performance individuals have a coach, like almost all times. Right. So I love that.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, like what we tell people and people don't realize is, the more successful you are, the more support you need. And so like when we decided to go to a marriage counselor last year, we didn't see it as like a negative thing, even though there's a lot of stigma around it.
Right.
We said, we set a goal. We set the focus to put ourselves first. We're like, even though we always try to be intentional, like the kids have come first and the businesses come first. We're like, let's take care of our mind, our body, our relationship. And we always see coaching as something everyone should do. And whatever's important to you, like you should be investing into it. And it may not always be financially. It might be time or it might be energy, but investing in coaches and support and getting the right environment and people around you is one of the best things you can do to really be successful and to, have the best life and everything you want, because we all need support. And the sooner you realize that and the sooner you surround yourself with support, the sooner you're going to feel more comfortable and more confident in anything you want to do.
No, absolutely, absolutely, man, and it's great that you found that. I feel like you found that at an earlier age, and like it's really it's showing, right, and it's working for you. I was a counterculture kind of jerk. I'm like, well, like I don't need anybody. I got to lone wolf this crap, right? And it really comes to mind. It's like, who you spend your time with, right? It matters. And do you want to spend time with people, not just because they're going to help make you better, but the intention is that you're going to make them better as well. You talked a little bit earlier about teaching children failure, right? I've got my oldest is in jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? Like he gets choked out all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now he doesn't take it as personal. Like he just knows that getting choked out, failing to defend that choke, failing in a moment doesn't mean that he's a failure for the rest of his life or anything. That's just a moment that you tapped out. You're on to the next one. So what's next? All right, don't get caught in that choke again, right?
Absolutely. I was gonna say, I was just thinking. So my daughter's been obsessed with this video game recently. So we were playing the other night, and I upped the level because we were doing really good. So I upped it to the next level of difficulty, and we started losing. And I'm like, oh man, we're bad. She's like, no, Daddy, we just had a bad game. We just need to play better. We're good,
Right?
We just didn't play that good that game.
Love that.
And I was like, man, look at the insights that this kid's had.
Father of the year again.
Yeah, and I tell my wife every day, I'm like, obviously we're biased. I'm like, but we are raising amazing kids. I'm like, if we done nothing else,
right.
it is just crazy at how much they pick up. And when you're intentional about doing this,
yes,
whether you see it or not, like they're getting it.
Yeah, well, I mean the mirror comment earlier in our conversation is like, listen, if you don't think that you're leading by some type of example, and if you hear your child like kind of being mean, or there's a tone that they're using, you're like, oh my God, that's me, right? That's your opportunity to, right the ship, to fix it all up, right?
Absolutely.
Your children find this podcast 10 years from now because podcasts are so awesome. And they're like, what was my dad saying about me? What is something that you would like to thank them for, and why?
If you guys are listening to this now, I'd like to thank you guys for just being you. Our kids really do what they want to do and don't worry about what other people think. And I think in this day and age where everyone's so worried about what other people think about them, to where like, for example, our son grew out longer hair, and then he saw that sister had a ponytail, so he started putting a man bun on the top of his head. And I walked into his daycare one day, and this girl said, oh, Ty's a girl, he's got a ponytail and girl sunglasses on. And he's like, no, boys can wear purple sunglasses, and boys can have this. And just seeing you guys be able to do what you want to do and not worry about what other people think is amazing.
I love that. So, allowing them to express their individuality, and they've stuck to that. And that's what's, 10 years from now, you're thanking them for. I love it.
Absolutely.
Anything left, brother, that you feel like we should be letting people know on the fatherhood circuit?
I don't know, man. We covered a lot here. And, I just tell people that, one, Brandon, thank you for what you're doing. I mean, when I came across this podcast a while ago, I was like, man, we need more of this. And, like you do such an amazing job with bringing amazing fathers on and asking really good conversation. And, I'm just honored to be here and to be able to share any insights that I have with people, and just know whatever you're going through, we all go through it, and realize that you got people around you that care about you, that are willing to support you. And sometimes you just got to ask, even if it's uncomfortable.
I love that, Tom. And thanks for, I want to say thank you because, it took us a while. I think it was like 2 years to get this one together. Mostly on me on that one, all of it. But what you're offering out there for coaching and helping other entrepreneurs get themselves situated is, I think, one of a kind, where you are truly focused on you, and also through your own experience of focusing on family first, helping them to design a lifestyle that is really true and meaningful. As I hear you talking about, it's purpose driven, it's values driven, and it's from the heart. So I want everybody, go ahead and reach out to Tom. You're at Tom and Ariana.com. I'll go ahead and share that link as well. You're also at Lifestyle Builders. Is it lifestylebuilders.com? I'm sorry.
So it's wearelifestylebuilders.com.
Okay. And then if you go, you guys have all kinds of podcasts, you've got all kinds of content. I think that, it's all very, very well done. It's all, I think it's all impactful. So thank you for that. Anywhere else you want me to send people to come check you out?
So we do have a book coming out. It's it's on pre-order right now. It'll be out in October. It's called Lifestyle Builders. And basically, if you're looking for that, you can go to lifestylebuildersbook.com.
Sweet, man. Well, looking forward to that being released. I know it's going to have a lot of value. And again, it's just you've done it in a way where family's first, and that's what we're here for, right? Fatherhood for the rest of us and family first. All right, Tom, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, man.